Void Miner, Epitaph of Helix, Part 5. Chapter 21. Two Keys Turn. The fragments thrummed with a persistence that seemed alive. Kara felt it everywhere, under the gloves, along her spine, in her chest. Each pulse tugged at her awareness, probing deeper than muscle or bone, reaching for memories, instincts, fears she hadn't named in years. Every time the shards aligned, even partially, the chamber responded with a flare of glyphs along the walls, lines that traced in perfect arcs, looping and curling like frozen lighting. And then the hum broke, snapping into discord, and the room's response turned jagged and accusing. Arg adjusted his position, moving just a fraction closer to Kara, keeping the distance the chamber seemed to demand. Fragments pulsed brighter, as if acknowledging the measure between them. Kara's head spun from the sensation. The shard wasn't just glowing, it was speaking, or testing, or demanding. Each vibration carried weight, and with it, a pressure on her mind, a whisper that was only faintly audible, but unmistakable in its insistence. Act together or fail. Her arms ached, muscles screaming from holding the shard in the precise alignment the chamber required. Her breaths were shallow, the recycled air of the cradle whispering past the edge of her mask. Every attempt to move faster, to anticipate the pattern, was punished. The humming shifted, jagged, almost violent, like the chamber was wounding itself as much as it was testing her. Arg's voice broke through, calm but firm. "Let it find you. Don't force it." She clenched her jaw. Let it find her? She wanted to argue, wanted to demand how, but the shard pulsed against her palm, a subtle thrum that echoed through her skull, making argument meaningless. So she held still, letting the resonance climb into her senses, feeling it map her heartbeat, her breathing, the minute tremor in her fingers. The chamber seemed to respond to that stillness. The glyphs shifted slowly, tracing arcs that almost hinted at comprehension, recognizing her submission to the rhythm. Arg mirrored her motion exactly, the twin pulses of their fragments locking in closer with every beat. Kara could feel the alignment building, a tension so acute it felt like standing on a knife's edge, knowing that a single misstep could shatter both fragments, or worse, end the test prematurely. Time lost its meaning. Seconds bled into minutes. Kara's shoulders burned, sweat running under her suit. She could hear Arg's own breathing, measured and steady, a counterpoint to the shard's erratic hum. The chamber seemed to recognize this, responding to the synchronized rhythm with a subtle quiver, a vibration through the floor that felt like the heartbeat of the cradle itself. "You're letting it control you," Arg said quietly. "Not in your favor. Just letting it flow." Kara's lips pressed together. She had always been impatient, always the first to act, the first to strike, the first to run. But here, impatience was death. The shards didn't care for her eagerness. She let her grip relax slightly, her eyes tracing the shifting glyphs, feeling the resonance flow through her instead of fighting it. The chamber's voice, or whatever intelligence lay behind it, seemed to sense the change. The light deepened, the hum softened, becoming almost melodic. Kara could feel it teasing apart old fears, examining her thoughts, and instead of recoiling, she let it. She allowed herself to be measured, tested, and understood. And in return, the fragments pulsed stronger, more insistent, guiding her towards Arg's alignment. "Almost," he said, his voice calm, almost a whisper. "Just a fraction more." Kara tilted the shard, matching his movements exactly. The hum began to resonate in perfect harmony. 2 voices in a single unbroken chord. She felt the chamber exhale through the glyphs, a slow wave of light rippling across the walls in recognition. And then it failed. Just a fraction, a misalignment too small to see, but enough. The hum shattered into a screech that reverberated through the chamber, rattling her teeth. The glyphs flickered violently, flaring red, accusing. Kara staggered backward instinctively, her arm quivering under the weight of the shard. Arg's voice cut through the chaos. Steady. Breathe. Again. She forced herself to inhale and exhale slowly, counting the beats. Slowly, carefully, she raised the fragment again, letting her own pulse sink, not fighting the chamber, but not anticipating it either. Arg adjusted simultaneously. This time, the resonance held longer, a continuous vibration that flowed across the chamber and through their bodies. The hum no longer jagged, no longer sharp. The glyphs pulsed rhythmically, following the twin chords of the fragments. Kara felt her tension ease fractionally, a tremor in her shoulders giving way to determination. They tried again, each adjustment bringing the fragments closer to alignment, the chamber reacting with subtle shifts, floor vibrations, whispers of air, currents of light that ran along the walls. Kara began to feel the fragments as extensions of themselves, not tools, not objects, but entities that demanded cooperation, understanding, patience. Minutes passed, though she couldn't measure them. Every attempt refined the alignment, every failure reshaping the hum, the chamber, their own perception of the rhythm. Kara's body ached from holding the shard aloft. Her hands trembled, sweat streaking her helmet glass. Arg remained steady, a rock in the storm. His fragment held with deliberate precision, his breaths slow, measured, inflexible. Finally, a breakthrough. The twin pulses of the fragments clicked into near-perfect harmony. The hum stabilized, resonating through the cradle with a deep, full tone that vibrated under their feet. The glyphs responded immediately, flowing outward in intricate patterns that coiled and spiraled across the walls, glowing in pale white and deep blue. Kara felt a pull in her chest, a strange pressure that was both oppressive and exhilarating. The chamber wasn't merely reacting, it was communicating, measuring, evaluating. The fragments hummed, but not at random. Every vibration, every flicker of light was data, information being exchanged between the chamber and themselves. Arg's voice, low and even, broke the focus. Now, move together. Kara mirrored him, adjusting her shards slowly. The hum shifted subtly, a feedback loop of vibration and light, and the container ahead gave a low groan. A single lock clicked free. Then another. Then another. The room exhaled in unison with the resonance of the fragments. The chamber pulsed again, and Kara realized, with a sharp intake of breath, that it was testing not just their skill, but their cooperation. Alone, either fragment might have faltered. Alone, they might have been rejected. But together they were shaping the outcome. Another lock released, and then the final one. A thin glow traced the edges of the container, sliding apart with a hiss that was almost like a sigh after centuries of waiting. Cold air rushed past them, brushing against Kara's visor, carrying the faint scent of ozone and something older. Something not quite alive, but certainly aware. The fragments pulsed with renewed intensity, brighter than before. The hum surged in their chests, a vibration that went beyond sound, beyond touch, into thought. Kara realized with a jolt that the chamber had not merely allowed entry, it had judged, and the judgment was passing through the fragments themselves, whispering of cooperation, of endurance, of survival. Arg remained still, but Kara could feel the tension in his stance, the subtle flex of muscles that belied his calm. He had sensed it too, the awareness in the chamber, the intelligence behind the interface. And yet, like her, he had endured, measured, and adapted. The container was open, and whatever waited inside was not passive. The fragments, aligned and resonant, seemed to feed the chamber's gaze, acknowledging its presence, defying it to judge them further. Kara exhaled, long and slow, letting her body sag against the shard. Arg lowered his slightly, but the fragments still hummed, two tones merging into one perfect chord. The chamber had not just accepted them, it had recognized them. A test of cooperation, a trial of patience, of skill, of endurance. And they had passed. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but together. The final pulse echoed in the room, vibrating through the walls, floor, and ceiling, threading them together in the resonance of shared effort. Kara's vision blurred from exhaustion, the hum inside her skull vibrating along every nerve, and she realized the fragment had become more than objects. They were keys, not just to the chamber, but to understanding what the cradle demanded, what the trial required. And now the chamber waited for the next step. Chapter 22. Rell's Last Drop. Arg's boots barely made a sound on the cradle floor, but he still felt the weight of every vibration in the chamber. The fragments hummed in his hand, still resonating from the alignment, a quiet but insistent reminder of what they'd just accomplished. Kara mirrored his movement, her own shard pulsing softly, eyes fixed on the container now open before them. Neither of them spoke, not yet, not while the chamber still thrummed like a living thing around them. Then a faint signal cut through the low resonance, a ping, just barely audible over the shard's hum. Arg stiffened instantly. Not every signal was worth noticing here. Most were dead zones, echoes, misfires from the cradle's passive system. But this one carried a familiar pattern, a precise modulation that raised the hair on his neck. Rell. He had expected no message, no comms. The man had vanished long ago into the belt after the war, leaving fragments of data like breadcrumbs for those who would follow. And yet, here it was, right when they were about to move deeper into the cradle. A hijacked, distressed ping blinked onto their feed, carrying a single, impossible packet of information. Kara glanced at him, brow raised under her helmet. "You're reading that too." Arg's fingers moved across his wrist console with practice speed, decoding the layered encryption. Each layer peeled back like a thin skin, revealing the next. And with each, his pulse quickened. He recognized Rell's handprint in the data stream, familiar even through the cold certainty of digital code. "Yeah," he finally said, voice low. "And it's not just a message, it's a full simulation. Verdict simulations." Kara's helmet tilted. "Verdict?" "Tests," Arg said, scrolling through schematics and subroutines. "Simulated outcomes, environmental responses, failure rates. Rell's been mapping this entire cradle in advance, anticipating everything." He tapped the screen. "And," his eyes narrowed, "he confirms what we feared. The list is a decoy. Everything we thought we were preparing for, the fleets, patrols, even the fragments, was meant to misdirect. The real exam is the trial itself. Kara exhaled sharply, a fog of breath inside her visor. Decoy or not, we're still about to walk into the teeth of it. Ark's jaw tightened. He leaned closer to the console, cross-referencing the simulation data with the fragment's current resonance. The hum from the shards pulsed in tandem with the readings, almost like a heartbeat, confirming his analysis. Timing matters, he muttered. Rell's last drop just saved us from rushing in blind. We now know what we're really facing. The cradle's walls seemed to lean closer, the glyphs flickering faintly in reaction to the shards. Kara felt the weight of that awareness pressing down. The container wasn't passive. It had accepted their cooperation, but now it was watching, waiting for the next step. And Rell's message made it clear. What they'd just passed wasn't a test. It was preparation. Check it all, Arg said. Every line, every simulation he sent. We move in, but only after we understand the risks. That's the point. Kara leaned over his shoulder, looking at the console on his wrist, her eyes scanning the coded schematics, simulated corridors and chamber interfaces, pressure points, and resonance maps. Every potential failure scenario was laid out in meticulous detail. She traced the path that they had just taken, noting the subtle ways the cradle could have trapped them, even after the fragment's alignment. They mapped it, she murmured, voice barely audible over the hum. Every chamber, every pulse, every possible sequence we could have triggered. He didn't just leave instructions. He left a map of survival. Arg nodded. His hand hovered over his wrist, watching the last layer of Rell's message unspool. It contained a final set of instructions, an overlay atop the simulations. One line caught his eye. 2 required. Cooperation mandatory. Judgment not paused. Kara's fragment vibrated against her palm. She flinched slightly, the reminder of what they had just endured still echoing in her nerves. It's watching, she said. Always has been, Arg replied. And now we know it's measuring more than just us. It's measuring what we do together. The chamber pulsed again, a gentle rhythm beneath their feet, in tune with the fragment's resonance. Arg stepped back, letting Kara take the lead for a moment, her shard guiding her as she reviewed Rell's simulation outputs. She leaned closer, tracing the resonance patterns they mapped to the chamber's energy flow. See here, she said, pointing to a series of jagged glyphs that pulsed irregularly. Those are thresholds. The chamber adjusts its response based on how we handle the fragments. And these lines, she traced a thin looping path, are the real hazard zones. Mistimed movements, misaligned pulses, could trigger containment measures, or worse. Ark's eyes followed the pattern, his jaw tight. That explains the hum earlier, the way the chamber punished missteps. Rell's simulations are basically a rehearsal. He anticipated failure, measured response, and gave us the data we need to avoid it. Kara leaned back slightly, glancing at him. So the list? The fleets we've been tracking? Everything out here? It was just noise? Exactly, Ark said, his voice low and measured. Distraction. This is the real game. And now we've got a final guide before we step into the chamber proper. The fragments vibrated again, the hum threading through their suits, threading through their skulls, a steady pulse that reminded them they weren't alone in their judgment. Arg watched Kara adjust her grip on the shard, letting it guide her hand to match the simulated alignment detailed in Rell's message. Check the coordinates, he said. Every access point, every potential risk vector. Rell mapped it all before we even got here. If we misstep now, it's not just the chamber. It's us. Kara nodded, tracing her finger over the holomap projected from his console. Every step they had taken so far, the fragments, the alignment, the container, all now fit into a larger grid, a matrix of cause and effect that Rell had left behind. This is more than just survival, she said quietly. This is verification. He's making sure we understand the trial before it even begins. Arg exhaled, fingers tightening over his shard. And that's why we wait. We move into the chamber, but we don't rush. Not now. Not ever. The cradle responded, subtle vibrations running through the floor beneath them. The glyphs pulsed in irregular rhythms, reflecting the fragment's dual resonance. Kara felt the shards pull, the quiet insistence of their demand for coordination. It wasn't just the physical alignment. It was mental, emotional, intuitive. Every pulse asked for synchronization in every part of her, every movement, every decision. Arg adjusted his stance, watching the container's edge, listening to the hum threading through the chamber. The last part of Rell's message glimmered on the console. A small line of text buried beneath layers of simulation data. Verify before committing. 2 required. Kara glanced at him, a faint tension easing in her shoulders. We're ready, she said. Arg didn't answer immediately. Instead, he raised his fragment slightly, testing the resonance. The hum responded, rising and falling, a perfect echo of their heartbeat, a confirmation that they were aligned, mentally, physically, and with the chamber. Ready, he said finally, but carefully. Every move counts. They moved forward together, each step measured. The fragment's pulses guided them, not merely illuminating paths, but judging intent, weighing patience and precision against fear and haste. Kara traced the walls, letting her fingers hover above the glowing glyphs, feeling the subtle changes in energy as the chamber reacted. The hum deepened, a steady vibration threading through the cradle, vibrating up from the floor into their boots, their bones, their very consciousness. The fragments' resonance intertwined, 2 voices singing in harmony, one guiding, one following, one testing, one observing. They paused before the chamber's central doorway. The container they had just unlocked lay to the side, open but empty, its purpose fulfilled. Now came the real step, the part that Rell's last drop had prepared them for, the trial beyond. Kara checked his console one final time. Every overlay from the simulations lined up perfectly. Thresholds, hazard zones, resonance patterns, chamber feedback, everything confirmed. The trial had not begun, not truly, but the preparation, the testing, the judgment of their cooperation had been completed. Arg placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, a signal rather than a touch. No words were necessary. She understood. They had passed the first test. Rell's last drop had ensured that. The fragments pulsed harder now, a shared vibration that seemed almost sentient, thrumming in harmony with the cradle. Kara felt it reverberate through her chest, a silent promise of the challenge ahead. The chamber was ready, the test awaiting, and they were aligned. Not just the fragments, not just the chamber, but themselves, together. The hum grew into a resonant crescendo, filling the room, threading the walls, the floor, their very thoughts. And in that vibration, Arg and Kara both understood. The trial would begin the moment they stepped forward. But they were ready. Chapter 23. Wake the Cradle. The cradle felt like it was breathing, That was Kara's first impression as she stood before the chamber's sealed doors, the shard in her palm thrumming in time with her heartbeat. The surface of the bulkhead wasn't flat metal, but some strange composite, dark as obsidian, yet veined with glyphs that pulsed faintly, like veins of light carrying some alien blood. The glow wasn't steady. It pulsed, contracted, released, almost like the walls themselves inhaled and exhaled. She didn't trust the illusion, but she couldn't ignore it either. Every time the glyphs swelled brighter, she felt her shard pulse in answer, and Arg's did the same. Two pieces of something greater, synchronizing not with her or him, but with the cradle itself. Behind them, the entrance chamber lay silent. The door they'd come through had sealed shut minutes ago. Ahead, only the unbroken seam of the trial chamber's threshold. She could hear nothing, not their own breathing inside their helmets, not the faint hum of Arg's ship's systems, nothing except the resonance of the fragments. The list was a decoy. The real exam is the cradle. Rell's final message still weighed heavily in her skull, each word etched like a warning. If the old smuggler's simulations were right, everything they'd just endured, the fleets, the shadow of the verdict, the whispers of control, had been stage dressing. The true judgment was here, in this chamber, hidden for who knew how long in the cradle's depths. Kara shifted her grip on the shard and glanced at Arg. He stood a pace off to her right, silent as stone, his own fragment catching light and bending it into sharp angles across his helmet. He had said little since they'd received Rell's ping. He didn't need to. His silence carried its own kind of certainty, an acceptance that there was no choice but forward. "You feel it?" she asked, her voice low, carried through suit comms. He didn't look at her at first. His gaze remained locked on the glowing glyphs running the door's seams, tracking their rhythm. Then he gave a slow nod. "Feels like it's waiting." "That's because it is," she tightened her jaw. "2 keys, 2 carriers. It won't open for one alone." Arg finally turned his head, visor glinting in the chamber's glow. "Then we turn them." His tone was iron, but the act wasn't mechanical. It required more than muscle or will. It required trust, an act of surrender to whatever rules the cradle had woven into its architecture. She thought of Rell again, of his voice cutting through static in their final message. The real exam is the trial. Kara raised her shard. It pulsed brighter the moment it neared the seam, as if the cradle smelled blood in the water. The glyphs brightened in response, crawling across the door in fractal waves. She held her breath and extended her other hand toward Arg. He didn't hesitate. His grip was firm, warmed through the gloves, his shard raised in his free hand. For a heartbeat, the three of them, herself, Arg, and the cradle, formed a circuit. The resonance of the fragments locked together, harmonizing into something deeper, older, more terrible. The chamber doors split. The seam cracked open with the sound of grinding stone, light bleeding through like dawn spilling into a cave. The bulkhead didn't swing so much as dissolve, its surface melting into ribbons of energy that peeled back, unraveling into the air. Beyond the threshold lay a chamber that should not have fit inside the cradle's dimensions. Vast, cathedral-like, its walls were sheer obsidian overlaid with spiraling glyphs of pale fire. The ceiling soared upward into a void too high to measure. Constellations of scripts suspended like stars. The floor pulsed beneath their boots, each step echoing as though the chamber itself was hollow and alive. Kara's throat tightened. "It's beautiful." Arg didn't reply, but his silence was different now. Not stoic, but reverent. The fragments in their hands flared brighter, light lashing between them like tethered lightning. The chamber responded in kind. Glyphs rippled across the walls, rearranging themselves into shapes Kara couldn't read but felt in her bones. Patterns of judgment, of scales weighed, of choices tested. At the far end of the chamber, the floor began to shift. Smooth stone folded away to reveal a dais, rising from nothing, its surface an altar of angular lines and glowing channels. At its center, two recesses awaited, perfect fits for their shards. Kara knew, without being told, that this was the lock. Ark's voice rumbled low. 2 keys turn. She glanced at him. His helmet obscured his expression, but his stance radiated certainty. No hesitation, no fear. He'd already decided this was their only road forward. Before she could answer, the chamber convulsed. A ripple of force surged through the air, slamming into them with a sudden shift of gravity. Kara stumbled, caught herself, then heard the glyphs flare blood red across the chamber walls. The resonance of the fragments spiked violently. Ark steadied himself with a hand on the wall, then cursed under his breath. External breach attempt. Kara's chest tightened. They found us? He flicked his wrist display, scanning. Tools on the outer locks, multiple points. Could be scavvers, EarthGov. Doesn't matter. They're trying to cut through. The words hit like ice. Of course. The cradle signal had been pulsing into the void for days, weeks maybe. Anyone chasing Helix remnants, anyone sniffing for power, would have followed it here. And now they were trying to force their way inside. She looked back toward the sealed entrance behind them. Nothing moved, but she could almost hear the grinding of metal under torches, the pounding of intrusion. What happens if they get in while we're here? She gestured to the dais. Ark's head shook, slow and deliberate. Doesn't matter. Trial won't wait. If we walk away now, it's over. The chamber itself seemed to agree. The dais glowed brighter. The recesses widening slightly, pulling at their shards. The glyphs rippled across the walls in urgency, their patterns shifting like waves under storm winds. The cradle wanted its keys turned. Kara exhaled hard, then lifted her shard. Ark moved with her, step for step, their boots echoing on the living floor as they approached the dais. The hum intensified until it rattled her teeth, until she could feel it in her chest cavity, until her shard burned hot against her palm. At the base of the dais, the vibration became almost unbearable. Kara raised her fragment over the left recess, its angles blazing with light. Ark mirrored her over the right. The shards screamed, resonance tearing the air between them, arcs of energy crackling against their suits. Kara's hand shook. Ark's didn't. Now, he said under his voice like steel under strain. Together, they lowered the shards. The fragments slid into the recesses like they had always belonged there. The moment they touched, light exploded across the dais, flooding the channels, racing outward along the floor. Glyphs on the walls blazing white-hot, the chamber alive with fire and thunder. Kara staggered back a half step, visor dimmed automatically against the glare. Ark didn't move. Then the voice came. Not sound, not exactly. It bypassed their ears, resonating directly in their skulls. A layered chorus of tones, neither male nor female, neither machine nor human. A voice that was not a voice. Trial accepted. 2 keys turned. Judgment begins. The dais sank slowly into the floor, shards locking in place, light bleeding upwards as if swallowed into the walls themselves. The glyphs writhed and reformed, collapsing into new constellations that spun slowly across the chamber. Ahead, the walls split apart, corridors uncoiled like living tendrils, spiraling paths of fire leading deeper into the cradle. Each pulsed faintly, beckoning, demanding. Kara's breath quickened. She thought she heard faintly the distant clang of metal on metal, intruders outside, cutting closer. She tore her eyes from the walls and looked at Arg. "We've started it." His shoulders squared, voice steady as iron. "Then we finish it." Chapter 24. Kill the Heartbeat. Holt had always believed machines had a rhythm. Not the cold precision most people thought of, but a rhythm closer to a heartbeat. Helix systems, list fleets, even the ugly jury-rigged engines of belt freighters, they all pulsed if you knew where to listen. And tonight, in the dark throat of a Helix relay spire, Holt had found the loudest pulse of all, the AI shard. It beat like a drum through the station's skin, radiating out across the void. He could feel it through his boots every time he paused. The wave vibration carried through metal and bone. Not sound, not really. More like pressure. Subtle, insistent, woven into the air itself. He crouched on a maintenance gantry halfway up the spire's core. Helmet lights dimmed, body pressed low against the rusted mesh. Below him, the core yawned wide, a vertical shaft lined with conduit bundles, data lines, coolant channels. The heart of the cradle's broadcast lattice. And there it was, humming steadily, unwavering, the shard's sync pulse. Helix had built it to unify fleets. The lists were never meant to think for themselves. They were a hive strung together on a leash of perfect timing. The shard was the metronome. Every ship, every gun platform, every drone, they all ticked to that rhythm. Kill the pulse, Holt thought, and you cut the leash. He unlatched the pack from his back and spread its contents on the gantry. 4 shaped charges, dull, gray, and pitted from years of storage. Their surfaces scored with belt etching. Old smuggler work, old tools from a war that no one admitted had ever ended. He checked each in turn, fingers moving on habit. Charge casing sealed, magnetic clamps intact, detonators synced to his wrist rig, each shaped to direct force inward, into the shard's housing, not out into the void. Holt didn't have the firepower to blow apart a Helix spire, but he didn't need to. He just needed to break the rhythm. A flicker of static brushed his ear. He froze, head tilting. Movement in the shaft. Holt killed his wrist display and went still as iron. The pulse of the shard continued to throb against the walls, masking finer vibration. But beneath it, yes, a second resonance. Boots on metal, faint but deliberate. Someone else was inside. He swore silently. Not scabbers, not miners. Too quiet, too precise. List handlers. They'd sent guardians to watch the shard. Holt slid the first charge into his vest and eased along the gantry. He moved without sound, weight spread across hands and knees, keeping below the lip of the mesh. Ahead, a ladder rail stretched down toward the core's midsection, where the shard's casing loomed like a buried jewel, half seen between coolant pipes. The shard itself wasn't large, maybe the size of a coffin, suspended in a cradle of helix alloy, but it radiated pressure, light spilling in faint arcs across the shaft walls, pulsing steadily as a drumbeat. Holt's lips tightened. That's the heart. He descended slow, step by step, until the heat from the coolant lines brushed his suit. Then he stopped and waited. Boot falls grew clearer now, echoing from above. Holt risked a glance. 2 silhouettes descending on the far ladder, armored but slim. Helix-cut exosuits, black as vacuum, shoulders etched with faint script that shimmered like wet stone. List handlers, but human ones. EarthGov mercs? Or true believers who thought the list still carried Helix's promise? Hard to say. Didn't matter. They'd die the same. Holt pressed flat against the coolant housing and thumbed his pistol safety off. The weapon was an ugly stub of metal, belt-made, hammer-worn, but in tight quarters, it sang true. The first handler dropped to the maintenance ring across from him. Helmet lights swept, cutting arcs across coolant lines. Holt waited for the second to follow. Patience ironclad. Timing was the trick. Always timing. 2 boots hit metal, the pair landed close, muttering low through helmet comms. Their words fuzzed in Holt's ears, scrambled by interference from the shard. He didn't need to hear. He saw the way they moved, synchronized, practice, both turning outward in a slow scan. Predictable. Holt moved as the shard pulsed. 1 heartbeat. He leaned out, pistol up. 2 heartbeats. 2 shots, tight as breath. Both helmets snapped back, visors bursting in twin fountains of glass and blood. The handlers dropped in silence, limbs slack. By the 3rd heartbeat, Holt had slid back behind cover, pistol cooling in his grip. He let his breathing settle. Not perfect. Stray arcs from the shot still echoed, but the shard's thrum covered most of it. No alarm yet. He stripped the charges free. No time for bodies. The shard needed braking. The climb down to its housing was harder. Shaft narrowed, coolant fog rising in slow drifts that clung to his visor. The hum grew stronger, more insistent, until Holt felt it vibrating in his teeth. He reached the base of the casing and pressed a gloved hand against it. The shard was warm. Not the warmth of machinery, but something deeper, biological almost, like skin flushed with fever. Holt jerked his hand back and cursed. "Hell are you, really?" he muttered. No answer, but the pulse. Steady, steady, like it mocked him. He unclipped the first charge and locked it into the casing's underside. The mag clamps latched with a hollow thunk. He armed the timer, keyed it to his wrist rig, and moved to the next angle. 4 charges, placed on the quarter turns. Precision didn't matter. Resonance did. If they hit in sequence, they'd break the shard's rhythm, like cutting a drummer's hand mid-beat. By the time he locked the 4th in place, sweat was slicking the back of his neck. His wrist rig pulsed green, synced, ready. Holt exhaled. "That's it. Curtain call." He pulled himself back to the maintenance ring, body tense, and keyed the sequence. The timers lit, ticking silent numbers on his display. Predictive stride. He'd modeled the shard's pulse down to the millisecond intervals. The charges wouldn't blow together. They'd stutter. Left, right, high, low. A staggered rhythm designed not to destroy, but to confuse, to shatter harmony. Holt crouched and counted heartbeats with it, lips moving soundlessly. 1, 2, 3, now. The first charge flared, a bone-deep crack shuddering through the casing. The shard's pulse faltered, stuttered once, tried to catch. The second hit, slamming from above. A scream of metal echoed through the shaft. The hum broke again, faltering harder, resonance collapsing. Third, fourth, each hammer blow tearing holes in its rhythm, until the pulse was no longer a steady drum, but a fractured gasp, broken into shards of sound and silence. Holt felt it collapse. The shards' glow dimmed, flickered, died. The silence was violent. For a moment, the shaft seemed dead. Holt could hear nothing but his own breath roaring in his ears. Then the outer comm bands flooded alive. Static, confusion, half-shouts in broken code. The List fleet had lost its heartbeat. Holt crouched on the ring, pistol tight, teeth bared in a grim smile. Out there, across the void and fire, ships that had once moved like fingers on a hand were staggering. No more synchronized turns. No more perfect salvos. Each vessel isolated, broken from the hive. He let the sound wash over him, the chaos he'd made, and whispered, "That's for Rell." But already he knew it wasn't over. The shard's casing still glowed faintly, twitching like a dying ember. Fragments of code spilled into the air, dancing glyphs that shimmered and vanished. Something deep within it still fought, clawing to restart the rhythm. Holt rose to his feet and drew his last charge from the pack. The big one. The one he'd sworn he'd keep for himself if it came to that. He set it against the casing and armed the fuse. No stagger this time. No clever rhythm, just annihilation. "Stay dead," he told the shard, and walked away as the timer began to count. Chapter 25. Measures. The chamber sealed itself behind them with a sound that wasn't mechanical so much as geological, like a glacier closing around a fracture. Kara glanced back once, instinct pulling her eyes towards the corridor they had left behind. But there was nothing. No door, no seam, no trace of passage. The way was gone. She turned forward. The space ahead of them was nothing like the ragged, bone-hollow corridors they'd fought through to get here. It was vast, curving away into the distance like the inside of some carved-out planet. The floor wasn't metal, wasn't stone, wasn't anything she recognized. It shimmered like glass, dark and deep, but when she stepped, her boots found friction, sound, weight. Above them, the ceiling, or what counted as one, shifted with a slow drift of light, a constellation rearranging itself by rules she couldn't follow. No glyphs, no runes, no panels of helix design, only alien geometries alive with subtle motion, as though the entire chamber were breathing with them inside it. Arg stepped a pace behind her. His boots echoed once on the glassy floor, then went silent as if the chamber itself had swallowed the sound. He didn't comment on the strange silence, or the light, or the way their breath fogged in the helmets, even though the suits weren't failing. He only said, "Keep moving." Kara exhaled sharply. "You ever get tired of sounding like everything's just another hall?" His visor turned slightly toward her. "Keeps me steady." She didn't push it. The fragments had already begun to hum, hers on one hip, his secured at his chest. Since they had paired them, the resonance hasn't ceased. A twin-beat thrum that seemed to work its way into their bones. She felt it now more than heard it, a pressure under the skin that matched the shift of the chamber lights above. They walked forward. After perhaps 100 paces, the floor changed. At first, Kara thought it was a trick of the light, but then she realized a new pattern was rising from below the glassy surface. Shapes, lines, diagrams, but not language. At least not as she understood it. They resembled star charts and anatomical sketches at once, outlines that rearranged themselves as soon as her eyes tried to fix them. The fragments pulsed harder. Kara slowed. It's showing us something. Arg stopped beside her. He tilted his head slightly, watching the lines swirl. Not showing. Asking. Before she could reply, the chamber shifted. The patterns resolved into a scene. The glass-dark floor rippled, then deepened, turning translucent. Beneath her feet, a simulation came to life. Kara saw a settlement, bare bones, rugged, nothing more than clustered shelters in a crater valley. Shapes moved within it. People, or something close enough to people that the cradle assumed they would understand them. Dozens, maybe hundreds, clustered around broken wells and gutted supply caches. Her chest tightened. The resemblance was uncanny. It looked like the belt in the famine years, when convoys were cut and rations were dust. From the simulation rose two figures, not holograms, manifestations, luminous, impossible but solid in the air before them. One carried a bundle of food, small but enough to save lives. The other bore a weapon, defense against raiders who circled in the dark beyond the crater. Kara didn't need an explanation. The choice sat in front of them, heavy as the fragments in their suits. Mercy under scarcity, she muttered. Give food, and the settlement survives. Keep defense, and they live long enough to be raided. Arg's voice was low. Or split it. She shot him a look. There's not enough to split. Always enough to split. The fragments pulsed again, harder now. She realized they weren't waiting for thought alone. They were waiting for action. A panel of light surfaced before her, alien in shape, but she recognized the intent. A decision point. She lifted a gloved hand, hesitated. Images filled her head, her own hunger in belt tunnels, gnawing emptiness, while she bartered stolen filters for a scrap of bread. She remembered the merc who had caught her once and nearly starved her out for her crimes. Scarcity was cruelty made real. She wanted to give everything. But Arg's voice cut through. Think long. Give it all, and they last a day. Keep defense, they may last a month. She bristled. So let them starve slower? Sometimes slower is all you've got. The fragments surged between them, almost painfully. Kara swallowed down her retort, stared at the images. There wasn't a right answer. That was the point. Finally, she pressed her hand to the panel and split the choice. Half the food, half the defense. Not enough either way. The simulation below shimmered. She saw the settlement ration, gaunt but alive. She saw raiders circle but falter, turned back by defense, half working. She saw deaths, but also survival. The panel dissolved. The fragments softened. The chamber approved. Kara realized her shoulders were trembling. That wasn't survival. That was scraping bone. Arg said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence carried his agreement. The floor rippled again. A new scene unfolded. This time a vessel in deep drift. She recognized the hull shape instantly, though she knew it wasn't truly real. It was a ship like the Dust Widow, patched, limping, out and void with failing systems. Inside the vision, figures huddled in dim light, crew stranded, running low on air. The cradle projected options again, clear, sharp. Jettison part of the crew to conserve resources, or attempt dangerous repairs that risked the whole vessel. Her throat dried. It's the same damn question. Who do you throw overboard? Ark's jaw flexed inside his visor. Or who you trust to hold with you. She turned sharply toward him. You'd risk the ship? I've risked worse. The fragments pulsed between them, measuring tension. Kara closed her eyes, forced herself to breathe. The cradle wasn't asking for Helix logic. It was asking for theirs. In the vision, crew argued. One pointed toward the airlock, another toward the engine core. Time was running out. Her hand hovered over the alien panel. Every instinct screamed that keeping fewer alive was still better than losing all. That was the cold math. But then she thought of Arg, how he'd carried her weight more than once, how he'd taken punishment without shifting blame. He didn't make easy choices, but he never made them alone. No betrayals, she whispered. Not this time. She pressed the choice. Risk repairs. Together. The ship in the vision buckled, tore, shuddered. But then lights flickered back, stabilizing. The crew staggered, alive. Kara's knees felt weak with relief. The fragments warmed, resonance smoothing into her chest. Approval. Arg gave the faintest nod. Better than bone scraping. She almost laughed, but it caught in her throat. The chamber shifted again. This time the simulation wasn't settlement or ship. It was battle. A fleet scattered across void, lights flashing, trajectories colliding. But their comms were gone. She knew it instantly. The way ships drifted offline, signals jammed, unity breaking. And at the center of it, a target loomed, colossal, faceless, the kind of threat you couldn't meet alone. Panels appeared again, one before her, one before Arg. Not a single decision this time. Two. Both glowed, distinct, impossible to reach alone. Kara's stomach sank. He wants us to do it together. Arg didn't argue. He only raised his hand to the panel, waiting. The fragments thrummed, higher and higher, demanding. Kara mirrored him. She realized the chamber had silenced even their suit comms. Her voice came back dead in her helmet. They couldn't talk, couldn't signal, couldn't plan. It was trust or nothing. She watched his movements, tried to anticipate. He didn't rush. He moved slow, deliberate, like every haul, every cut, every dangerous drift he'd ever made. She matched him. The panels shifted beneath their hands, sequences changing, timing fracturing. She nearly faltered twice, caught only by the steady patience of his rhythm. Her chest burned. Sweat soaked her underlayers. She gritted her teeth, forced herself to keep pace. Finally, after what felt like endless beats, the panels dissolved together. The fleet in the vision surged back into formation, ships aligning, weapons firing in synchrony. The faceless threat cracked, shattered. The fragments in their suits rang like bells, harmonized full. The chamber stilled. Kara gasped, dropping her hand. Her body ached as though she'd been fighting for hours. She looked at Arg. His visor hid his expression, but his shoulders rose and fell with heavy breaths. The floor below cleared. No more simulations. Only darkness, depthless. And then a new door opened ahead. Not mechanical, not carved. It unfolded like light parting, revealing passage deeper into the cradle. The fragments pulsed once hard, as though satisfied. Kara swallowed hard. 3 measures. Ark's voice came low, quiet, but certain. And more ahead. They stepped forward, together. The end of part 5 of Void Miner Epitaph of Helix.